Hi everybody, so by popular demand we're shooting an assembly video for Electric Motorworks JuiceBox Premium Edition. What you see here is a combination of the parts that you will be getting as part of your kit and the tools that will be required to assemble, tune it, and test it. So going from the left here, on the bottom this is a base plate for the EVSE. It will come with a power supply on the right and the relay on the left installed. Next here we have some wiring that you will use, LCD, current sensor, fully assembled PCB with preloaded software and calibrated, cable glands, and again from the left a remote in a bag with transmitter and the receiver, some hardware, JuiceBox label, and on top there is a short instruction sheet pointing you to the latest version of the manual and a box with a top of the enclosure. And this on the right here is a gasket that is used between the base plate and the top of the enclosure, and a window that you will also silicone into the enclosure. So for that you will need a regular silicone caulk that you can buy at Home Depot. Other tools that you will need: some screwdrivers, flat Phillips, cable strippers, some adjustable wrench, and a multimeter and wire snips. The adjustable wrench should be able to go out to about 1.5 inches. You will use that to secure cable glands into the enclosure. Okay, so the board is now attached. Next thing we're going to do is connect some wiring from the board to the power supply and from the board to the relay. First, we're connecting power supply to the board. We would just use a single color wire, about 2.5–3 inches long. Just going to cut a few of those. Okay. Insert the wire into the power supply terminal and then corresponding position on the board, and then solder. I'm going to do it for a total of 5 times. So the positions on the board are the same as positions on the power supply in sequence. Let's go. Okay, so all the power supply connections are done. Now we are going to make connections between the relay and the board, and relay and the power supply. So we are going to use 3 different colors of wire so that we don't mix up any of the connections. One set of connections will go from the power supply, AC terminals, to the input terminals of the relay. Another pair of connections will go from the PCB into the control terminals of the relay on both sides. And the third pair of connections will go from the PCB to the output terminals, high voltage terminals of the relay. So let's do that. So the first couple of the positions here on this connector, J2 connector and the PCB, go to the relay control terminals, which are on the sides of the relay and are small signal terminals. I'm going to use the same trick as we used with the base edition. Just create a little wire loop on the wire here so that we can bolt it. Okay, one done, one to go. The opposite side. Okay, control connections are done. Now high voltage connections for the J side of the relay. So these ends would go onto the output terminal of the relay, but we're not going to install them just now because we also need high power connections go there. Okay, and the last one is the connection between the power supply and the input terminals of the relay. The two leftmost terminals on the power supply are AC input positions. That's where we put these black wires in. So one of them will go to this input position and another one will go to this input position. Okay, same thing, prepare the loops, but not install just yet because again we will need the input cables to go to the same positions. So we'll do it once the input cable is ready. Okay, so next we are going to prepare the top of the enclosure. And then after we've done that, we are going to install high power wiring into the kit and then just close it all up. So the top of the enclosure is shipped in its own little box. Looks like this. Beautiful, powder coated, aluminum, custom made, die cast enclosure. What we're going to do to it is we're going to install the input and output glands. These are the glands. We'll just remove the outer nut because we don't need it, because the thread is already done in the top of the enclosure. We would then thread those in. That's where you will need to use this adjustable wrench. Almost fully open. This is 1.5 inch wrench sold in Home Depot and places like that. And we would just tighten up the glands. One more thing that you need to do is install this plastic window into its place here. So it's already cut to size. All we need to do is to apply some silicone on the sides of the window and then affix the okay, so silicone is in and the window or glass is pressed into silicone a little bit. What you do then is you would let it sit for a half an hour or so, and then maybe apply another layer of silicone, let it sit a little bit more, and then put the supplied screws to fix the piece of glass in place, just in case something presses on it from the outside after you install it. So the screws to use are these small M3 screws and the small washers that will then grab on the side of the glass. Okay. For our purposes here, we're just going to use one of the enclosures that has been prepped already, which is right here. It already has the silicone is all set, the screws are in, and also the gasket that you see here is installed on the perimeter of the enclosure. So what we're going to do next is we are going to thread the input and output cables through the glands so that we can work on them inside the kit. Okay, so here we threaded the cables through the glands, and this is a J1772 output cable. Note the sequence of the cables, how they go in. So this is the output, this is the input. So the J1772 is prepared in the following way. There's 16 inches or more of the power wires that are made available here with some lugs attached to the ends. The lugs will be supplied in your kit. The ground wire is cut short, so just sticking out, and one of the terminals is applied here. And this is a pilot wire, which is cut to about 8 inches. The input cable is basically much simpler, about 3-4 inches of each wire.
Okay, we need to reshoot
Okay.
this.
So now we have the cables threaded through the glands. This is J1772 cable, output cable. This is input cable. Note the orientation. The output cable is prepared in the following way. The power wires, these two, red and black in a 32 amp version. We need to make about 16-17 inches of them available, and then attach terminals on the ends of the wires. The ground wire, this short one here, is just cut almost to the jacket, and the terminal is attached to that. This is a pilot wire, it's about 8-9 inches. The input cable is simpler. There's 3-4 inches off each of the wires with terminals. White neutral wire is not used and cut to the jacket. So what we're going to do now is we're going to thread as much of the cable as possible through the glands, both cables, and then set the enclosure aside. So that we can work on the attachment of these cables to our kit. First, let's attach the input cable. The green wire goes to the ground post right here, and the other two wires, red and black, go to the input terminals of the relay. In addition to securing the power wiring, we also need to remember to attach these small wires that we prepared before. These wires go to the power supply. The small wires go on top, the power wires go on the bottom, so that there is a direct contact of the power wire terminal with the relay terminal. Make sure they're well fastened. So these are high power connections, and you don't want any resistance in those. Same with the second one. Okay, so that would be input wire. The glands that it comes through will be on the left side of the unit once it's assembled, so this is how you position it. Now the J cable, the ground post goes to the ground position. And we would use the 632 nut to fix it. This is round. The power terminals, or power wires, have to go all the way up and through these sensors, and then back to the output positions of the relay. one of them has to go through both sensors, and one of them has to go through just one. The first sensor that you see here is used to sense the output current, and the second sensor, the one that both wires will go through, is used for GFCI protection. It senses the imbalance of the currents between these two wires. So the first one we push through both sensors, and the second one goes through just one. If you are assembling your unit with 60 amp cable, you will want to wait until you push the wires through before you attach the terminals. Otherwise you won't be able to push them through the second current sensor. So now both of these wires are through. We should try to position them symmetrically as they exit the second sensor. So we would push one of the wires to one side and another wire to the other side, and we would then attach them to the output terminals of the relay. Again, we're not forgetting the small wires that we prepared earlier that need to go to the same positions. One and two. Okay, so the last thing to do is to attach the pilot to the right place on the board. The pilot pad is the outermost pad out of these three pads here on the end of the board that's closest to the relay. So we need to solder this pilot wire to this pad. Okay, this should now be ready for testing. Okay, now we're going to power this unit up for the first time into a 240 volt outlet, and we'll see what the screen says. Okay. Alright, the screen is alive. The relay should click now, and the default screen is on. and it says the version and of the firmware. Alright, so everything is on now and ready for final adjustments of the cables. So best to orient your kit in this position so you can see and operate on the wires. Careful, it's powered up, and it will be powered up when you make the adjustments, so you might want to maybe wear electrical gloves if you're particular paranoid, but in general it's high voltage here, so careful. So what we did here is we applied the multimeter between the ground and A1 pin of the Arduino. What this measures is the smoothed up voltage of the GFCI circuit. What we will try to do now is minimize that voltage when the load is connected, so that we don't have false GFCI trips. On most of the kits you will not even have to do it, so maybe the first thing that you do is you just plug it in into your car and see if it ramps up to the full current without tripping, and if it does, then you're done. You don't need to do anything. In some rare number of cases, the unit will have a trip, which you will see, you will hear by the relay disconnecting. And if that happens, then you need to go for this sequence. Plug in again multimeter between the ground, one of the posts is fine, and it's the A1 pin of the Arduino. Okay, now we're going to plug it in. And you will see this reading jump a little bit. Okay, so the relay clicked in. There's about 17 amps going through the system right now on our test rig, and what we want to do is orient the wires so that we minimize the voltage. So right now we have 0.4 volts. Which, as you can see, it does change with the orientation of the wires. Okay, we're getting somewhere. So this is probably as good as it's gonna get. So we are just going to use another measure of silicone to fix the wires in that orientation inside the sensor. Okay, so after this sets, your JuiceBox will be ready to be packed up and put into operation. Let's unplug it now. Great. Okay, the final and most exciting part of the assembly, putting it all together. Before you do that, remove the protective film from the LCD. will be kind of hard to do after you assemble the whole thing. So here's what you do. You turn over the base plate and slowly pull on the wires so that the base plate slowly gets into place. Once it's very close, I'm going to lift the base plate a little bit so that the PCB goes in, just like that. And there you have it. This is almost done now. You would use the supplied M4 screws to finish the assembly. They should be going right in. Don't fasten, as usual with the enclosures and everything, don't fasten everything at the same time. Just put the screws in and then we would fasten them completely in a star pattern. Looks like I need one more screw here. Okay, so here it is, assembled premium JuiceBox. The only thing that's left to do now is to tighten the glands so that you provide strain relief for your cables. You want these to be very tight. Basically, you shouldn't be able to push in or pull out the cable once it's done. So the output is done. Let's do the input now.